to go. There I am. I made it. I'm on now. You made it to church. You fought through whatever traffic was there, so thanks for being a real one. You may have not known this, or if you knew it at one time, you may have forgotten, but in August of 2022, we acquired property at 414 Brandon Street, which is Epic Church's future home. Did anybody remember that?
Yes, sir.
But you're like, you haven't heard a lot about it lately, except for like, oh, we're just waiting it out. Well, this past week, Will and I on Tuesday received the final design plans. We are still moving forward at 414 Brandon Street, so you can be praying. I mean, thank God for that. Be praying for the permits that are already with the city. Be praying for our lender. Be praying for our church, those of us who've made commitments and will make commitments so that we can step into that. It's going to take about 9 months to build, and our prayer that I would ask you to join us in praying is that they would begin the demolition in January. If they begin that in January, hopefully around this time, if not a little sooner, we will be in our future church home. So, but today we're wrapping up the You Care Too Much series. Next week, we launch Advent as a church. And when we launch Advent, kind of between next Sunday all the way through Christmas Eve, we're going to have Advent moments where singles and couples and family members come and lead us in those moments. And the word Advent just means arrival. And our Advent series for this year that I'll be kicking off next Sunday is called Waiting Without Fear. And the reason I think it's super important to talk about that is that whenever you and I are waiting, we're waiting for something that we don't have yet, and we're waiting for something that we're not sure we're ever going to receive. And when there's a gap because of our waiting, oftentimes you and I, we tend to fill the gap with doubt and anxiety and fear. But wouldn't you love to be able to learn how to wait with faith and not just wait with fear? Anybody want to know the difference between how do you passively wait for something that you're waiting on and how do you actively wait? Well, I'll be talking about that next week, and we would love to see you here. But for today, we're going to close out this You Care Too Much series. I still remember the first time I felt it. It was like some kind of magic. I was in the 4th grade. And there was a day in the 4th grade where I realized that if I wore a shirt that had a little horse on it right here and said Polo on the tag, I was a valuable person. Anybody have that moment? Anybody have that moment with a different brand? On 3, just tell me your brand. You may have grown up in a different generation. I'm not dating myself here. You might have grown up in a different country, but I would just love to know on 3, boys and girls, men and women, what was the thing that, like, if you had it, you had it? 1, 2, 3. Davy Crockett hat. I don't know what that is. I got you, man. I'm with you. Well, for me, I realized that if I had a polo shirt, that my value went up instantaneously. So your boy was rocking that one shirt I had like 3 days a week. I mean, if this is the ticket, then I am good to go. And it was only a year later that I saw the dark side of the same phenomenon. It was spring. I was 11 years old, and I was doing that spring what I did every spring, which was preparing to play Little League Baseball. I have a brother who is a year older than me. His name is Lee, and he was 12, obviously, that year, and we were on the same team, and our dad was the coach. And my mom and dad did something that season that they always did, but not in the way they had always done it. Obviously, if you're going to step into a new Little League season and your feet have grown from the last Little League season, you've got to get new cleats, baseball people, cleats, shoes, cleats. So they did what they always did. They bought us cleats, but this particular year they told us, hey guys, we're not going to be able to buy you Nike cleats. In fact, we're going to do something different because it's all we can afford this year. So they took us to Kmart. Anybody ever been to Kmart before there were no more Kmarts? So they took us to Kmart, and instead of buying Nike cleats like we were accustomed to, they bought us McGregor cleats that year. Now, I want to be honest with you. I was fine with the McGregor brand until I wasn't. I was fine for a little bit. We got the cleats. I still remember them in my mind. Not that they've left an impression on me. But they were mostly white with black McGregor writing, black on the bottom. And I was fine with them. I wore them to practice. I wore them to the first few games. And then I was wearing them in a game. And my feelings for McGregor changed in a moment. My feelings about myself changed in a moment. I was in the on deck circle. If you're not a baseball fan, don't understand how the game works, it means that I was the next one up to bat. And while I'm in the on deck circle, Chris Brookhouse is not playing in the game. He's outside the fence behind me. He's the number 1 player in our Little League. And in a moment, he said 3 words to me that changed everything about how I felt about those cleats and how I felt about myself and how I felt about Chris Brookhouse. Here are the 3 words he said to me. Your cleats suck. And you guys, it's so vivid that I can picture myself there right now, even though this happened 35 years ago. 35 years ago. I'm still getting over it. Well, from there, I move on to middle school. And, well, middle school. I mean, can we just be honest for a second? Most of you who know my jam in life, I'm an optimist. I'm all about, hey, don't just merely survive in life. You need to be thriving in life. For middle school, I think the best you can do is survive. Can I get a witness? Anybody besides me? And I was speaking to some of our middle schoolers earlier. I'm like, I'm sorry. Just hold on. Yes, hold on to Jesus. Just hold on. Period. Just hold on. So I go to middle school. I'm there in the cafeteria, 7th grade. And not that I remember people's first and last names, but this guy, Jeremy Wheeler. I'm just eating. And here's what he said to me. Ben, you eat French fries like a girl. Ladies, I don't know what that means. I promise you. But I do know what it was like to feel insecure every time I had French fries for the next few years. So to all of you in the congregation, when you see me at In-N-Out, I'm not being a glutton. I am not being disrespectful of other people who are eating. But when you see me throwing 7 or 8 fries in my mouth at a time, I'm just showing you that I know what it's like to eat French fries like a man. Okay? That's all I'm doing. I go to high school. And for 9th grade, I went to a really large public high school where, honestly, I mostly felt unseen. And the next year, for 10th grade, my parents sent me to a private school that was smaller, and I really believed, and it was true, I had a chance to stand out. I had a chance to make the baseball team at that school. You know how that goes. I had a chance to be a part of the in crowd, and I did enough to actually get in with the crowd that I was wanting to be a part of, but I wonder, especially looking back, like what did I have to give up so that I could satisfy the crowd that I thought mattered most? It's been funny for me to tell you about what happened in 4th grade and what happened when I was 11 and what happened when I was in middle school and maybe even what happened when I was in high school. And I wish, don't you, that when you exited adolescence that the desire to satisfy the crowd went away? But what I know for you and for me, whether you're 13 or 23 or 43 or 63 or 73 in the room, you continue to have some kind of temptation to fit in with a particular group of people. And so I want to give you a lot of what I hope will be questions and principles to help you process what we're talking about today, because I believe that you can walk out of these doors with incredible freedom. Would anybody like to walk out with a little more freedom than you walked in with? Anybody, would you like to walk in aiming your life in a direction where you're pleasing God and no longer trying to just please the crowd? I believe that's possible, but here's the question you need to ask yourself, or I want to ask you. Who is the crowd you are tempted to satisfy? Who is the crowd you are tempted to satisfy? If you just started a company, I'm guessing the crowd that you're tempted to satisfy would be your investors and hopefully your future customers. Some of you who have kids at school, you're tempted to satisfy the other parents at your kid's school. And we all know how this works, right? Like things can be a train wreck at home, but when you see those other moms and dads at your kid's school or preschool, you use those 7 minutes to make everyone else think you have it all together. Right? Maybe the person that you're tempted to satisfy is the person who holds the power for your next promotion. Some of us, we're tempted to satisfy our parents, no matter how old we are, and others of us are tempted to make sure that our kids are satisfied with everything that we do. I want to ask you a question that if you just saw it on paper, or if I had a harsh tone, you would think it's a question of condemnation, but I want you to hear hopefully a little more gentle tone, giving you a question of invitation and exploration. Here's the question. Is it possible you care too much about pleasing people and not enough about pleasing God? I say it's a question of invitation because I want you just to be curious about it. I don't want you to go, oh yeah, I'm the worst person. No, I just want you to think like, hey, is it possible? Like could it be true that in this series, what we've been doing, if you're just checking in with us, today is week 11, and the premise of the series is that there are some things in life we care way too much about. There are other things in life we care too little about, but if we could right-size the value of everything, wouldn't our lives go a little better? And here's what some of us have done. We have elevated what other people think about us, and we have actually minimized what the God who created us and the only one who knows us actually thinks about us. So could it be possible that you care too much about pleasing people? If you continue to care too much about pleasing people, let me tell you what's coming for you. For starters, you won't be able to be an effective leader. If you care too much about pleasing people, you will live out of a false self more than you live out of your true self. If you care too much about pleasing people, you will do whatever it takes to make your kids happy, but you won't do what's best for them. If you care too much about pleasing people, you will be one person here at Epic today, but when we see you, if we could see you at the office tomorrow, we'd be like, who is that? Because if you're about pleasing people, then it depends on who you're surrounded by, what you will act like. And I think the question that I really want to explore with you is this one. Whose approval would mean everything to you? And I don't want you to answer out loud, but I want you to think about the question. Like, honestly, whose approval would mean everything to you? Is there a boss that if you could get their attention and they gave you a promotion and they gave you the big project that your company's going to be doing in 2024, would that be everything to you? If you're longing to be married one day, I love that you have that longing, but is there a certain man or a certain woman, you're just like, if they would just know that I exist, that would mean everything to me. Whose approval would mean everything to you? If you have a Bible on you, we're in Mark chapter 15. We're going to look at verses 9 through 15, but let me walk us into this moment. It's probably a scene you're familiar with. It's, one, if not the most significant moment in all of human history. Without the moment we're going to look at in a second, you would not have a Christian faith. We would have no reason for Will to have led us in communion or for us to be singing songs about Jesus making a home for us. We're walking into this moment where Jesus is before Pilate. Pilate is the Roman governor who's over Judea between AD 26 and AD 36. Pilate really holds a lot of power. And in this moment, it's the Passover festival. And on the Friday that you and I would come to call what? Good Friday. Pilate and Jesus have this exchange, and then Pilate has an exchange with these religious leaders. They have bound Jesus, and they brought Jesus before Pilate, and Pilate has this custom that he's trying to lean into, and the custom is this. Every year during the Passover festival, they would release a prisoner, and Pilate's trying to figure out how can he do the right thing and still please the people. Have you ever been there? You want to do the right thing, but you want to please the people, and then you realize at some point push comes to shove. Well, push comes to shove because the people do not want Pilate to release the innocent Jesus. They want Pilate to release the guilty Barabbas. Stand with me. Let's see what happens. And it's a scene that you have probably heard about, read about before, but my guess is, I know I've never taught it from this angle. I'm curious if you've ever learned it from this angle. Verse 9, this is from Pilate. Do you want me, to the religious leaders he's asking, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews? Pilate asked them. Crucify him, they shouted. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the more, crucify him. And here's the phrase of all phrases for today. Wanting to satisfy the crowd. Wanting to satisfy the crowd. Wanting one of the most horrific things, but beautiful, that's ever happened. One of the most evil acts ever created in humankind. Wanting to satisfy the crowd. Pilate released, not Jesus, Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. I'm curious what we're doing, wanting to satisfy the crowd. You may be seated. If you're like me, you have outrage over what Pilate has done, and I think that's appropriate. I think when things like this go down, we should have outrage over it. Like, Pilate, how could you do this? Like, you knew what was going on. How could you hand over the innocent Jesus? Pilate, you knew they were doing this out of their own self-absorption and out of their own self-interest. You know he's innocent, or at least he certainly hasn't done anything deserving of execution. Pilate, what are you doing? And it's easy to point my finger and for you to point your finger at Pilate, but could we just be honest for a moment? Though it may have never been this catastrophic, don't we all have a little bit of Pilate inside of us? In fact, I'm going to do you a service that you might not thank me for, but I want you, rather than give you this principle, I'm just going to leave a fill in the blank for you. Here it is. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, I fill in the blank. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, I just go along with everyone else's opinions at the office. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, I just let my kids do what I know isn't good for them, but they are my crowd. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, I buy clothes and cars that I really can't afford to impress people I don't even know. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, well, sure, I just use language like everyone else around me uses. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, I preach sermons that will make you happy. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, I refuse to bring my full self into my dating relationships. And for so many of us wanting to satisfy the crowd, we haven't even gone public with our faith. Some of you, you've put your faith in Jesus, and you really, part of you at least, wants to go through and get baptized with others doing that on December the 10th, but you want to please the crowd more than you want to do that. Some of you, when you get asked about how your weekend went, you're like, Friday I did this, right? Come on, have some fun. I'm still in the humor zone, okay? If it stings, it's gonna be funny. That'll let it off a little bit. And you're like, Saturday I did this, and then you like skip all of Sunday, and you're like, hey, at 1:27 p.m. Sunday, I started doing this, right? Well, we're not the first people that struggle with knowing how to go public with our faith when we're not sure how the crowd around us will take that. I mean, listen, you just go to church. Imagine what it's like when I meet strangers. They're like, so what do you do? Like, I lead a group of people. It's like an organization. It's kind of like a business. What do you guys do? We have coffee. We get reimbursed if we park. Yeah, it's great. All ages, right? Look at this from John 12, 42 and 43, just to know that we're not the first. Here's what John writes about a group of people based on our topic today. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him, believed in Jesus. Listen, so they had genuine faith. It's very important. This is not false faith. They had genuine faith. But because of the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they would not openly acknowledge their faith for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. Listen, here's this sobering line. For they loved human praise more than praise from God. And I want to ask us, like really ask us, will we live for human praise or praise from God? Can I tell you something that's really encouraging to me in this season? I'm seeing so many of you in our congregation bring your full selves into every arena of life, and I love it. I am seeing so many of you go public with your faith, even though you know not everyone around you is going to be on board with that or agree with that or be a fan of that. This was on display again this weekend. On Friday night, I went to a birthday party of a close friend, and there were 200 people there. Yeah, I know. It's like, and some of you are like, Ben, why don't I get invited to your birthday party? Because I don't have 200 people at my birthday party. Only half my family even gets to come to my birthday party. There were 200 people at this party, and if I were to tell you some of the names that were there, you would know these names. And what's wild, because I know so many of these stories, more than half the people at this party for sure did not share the common faith in Jesus that you and I have, that I have, and that the birthday boy has. And his friends from all sort of seasons of his life, all the companies that he worked for, and then his wife got on the microphone, and the very last thing that was said on the microphone is like, hey, so glad you guys are here. I know you're from his different seasons of life that you've shared with him, but we just want you to know, and this is wild, in a very setting full of non-Christians, people who you might want to impress if you were a crowd pleaser. And they just said, what we want more than anything else is for you to know and follow and love Jesus. It was unbelievable. Now, here's what was even more unbelievable. It didn't surprise anyone there. They had all been told that before by this couple. They had heard it on a podcast, or they had sat down over coffee with them to hear about their faith. And for me, just to sit there, and as I went back to my hotel room that night and flew home yesterday, and just to think that, my goodness, if this person can do it there, we all can do it wherever. So how about for you? Human praise or praise from God? Now, what I wish was true, and maybe you wish was true also, is like, I honestly wish I could please God and please all 8 billion people on planet Earth. Anybody else? Like, wouldn't that be great? Like, just think about it for a second. Like, everywhere you went, everyone was happy with you. Wouldn't that be amazing? But guys, it doesn't work like that. I have 4 children, and we will have dinner together tonight. We're all here. We're all together, which is super fun. We will have dinner together tonight. I will even pay for dinner tonight. And even with those 4 humans, not everybody's going to be thrilled with where we eat tonight. You ever been in that family where you go one place for one of you and another place for another of you? That's called being spoiled, kids. That's being spoiled. But we do it too. We do it too. Listen, if I can't please 4 humans with what we have for dinner tonight when I'm paying, how in the world are you and I going to be able to please everyone in the world? And by the way, if you don't know that, there's more than 4 humans in our church. In February, we'll turn 13 years old as a church. I don't know what those I don't know if it'd be like the middle school thing or what that experience will be like. But what's kind of wild that you may not know is that over these 13 years, we've had more than 20,000 individuals walk in our door. That's pretty amazing. But let's be honest, if I would have pleased all of them, you wouldn't have a seat today. And there have been times where criticism comes and people tell me you should do this, and sometimes they're right, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not right. And one thing I've learned over the years that I want to pass on to you today because I want to see you thrive in what we're talking about. Here's the principle that I've learned. It's way easier to love and lead people when you don't need their approval. When it comes to the team you manage at work, if you don't need their approval, you will lead them better. When it comes to how you parent your children, you will love them better if you don't need them to be happy with every move you make. Let me even say it citywide. You guys, we will make a great impact on the city of San Francisco if we don't need applause from all 800,000 of her residents. We can actually make a difference. And I want to talk about leadership for a little bit because this is a passion for me, but I also want to talk about it because I know a lot of you are leading in different spaces, and even if you're the parent of one child, you are a leader, if you didn't know that. But another reason I'm going to talk to you just a second about what this principle, how it plays into the aspect of leadership that I'm wanting to cover with you is so many of you, because you're trying to satisfy the crowd, you are being paralyzed as a leader, and you could be elevating to greater levels of leadership, but you're so insistent on pleasing people. Listen to me. Leadership cannot be about pleasing people. Here's why. Leadership, especially in the beginning, is about taking people where they would not choose to go on their own, right? Guys, if people were going there by themselves, they wouldn't need us to be leaders. And if you need everyone to be happy with you, you must forfeit your option of being a leader because you can't be a leader and make everyone happy. We call ourselves followers of Jesus. Do you think Jesus could lead us well if he was only interested in making us happy? Come on, it's not a trick question. No. What does he tell Peter? Peter's like, hey, what do you have for me after the resurrection? And Jesus is like, well, listen, don't worry about what I have for John. I got something for you. You follow me. You follow me. And I'm thankful that this is a struggle every human has dealt with before. Some of us, we won't raise our hands, but some of us are chronic people pleasers. Others of us, it doesn't hit us as strongly, but we still have some people pleaser in us. And I want to show you something that Paul told the Galatians in Galatians 1, verse 10, because Paul is like this, man, he's planting churches in these global cities. He's bold. He's suffering for his faith. But listen to what he said about his previous life. Galatians 1:10, Paul writes, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? Listen to this line. I love this. It tells us a little bit about his history. Paul writes, if I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Anybody encouraged by that besides me? As someone who's struggled with people pleasing a lot in my life and in my love and in my leadership, I'm so glad Paul's going, hey, I know what that's like. And he just says what we're trying to do today. He made this discovery that at the end of the day, he cannot please people and be a servant of Jesus. So not only can you not be a leader if you're trying to please people, you can't be a servant of Christ if you're trying to please people. At some point, you've got to forfeit one and keep the other, and we've got to be real intentional about which one we're going to keep. So let me tell you a couple of practical things that have really helped me not give in to the temptation to satisfy the crowd and to try to live my life aimed at least at pleasing Jesus. The first one is this: give more attention to your inner circle than your outer circle. Guys, before our team made this look better, I just drew what you're about to see in my own moleskin. Because what had happened for so much of my life, I had given way too much attention to the outer circle and caring what the outer circle is like people that don't even know us. They don't know you exist, but we're still thinking about how can we impress them and please them. Then the next circle in is think about like depending on the size of your company, it could be your whole company. It could be your department. You could think of that next circle in as being our whole Epic Church congregation, about 1,500 people that show up once a month at least, over a month. So that's what that is. Now, the big difference for me is to determine what I'm going to do with my second circle and my inmost circle. The second circle for me is this, and if this helps you, great. If not, forgive me. The second circle for me, these are people that are friends of mine. These are people that we will do things together. We will talk a little bit about our dreams. But I still don't go to the full, deepest level of entrustment with that second circle like I will with my inner circle. My inner circle is people who know God, know me, know how God has made me, know me at my best, and are willing to speak truth to me about that, but always in love. So what would it look like for you to give more attention to your inner circle than your outer circle? Another question I've asked myself that I want to ask you that's been helpful with this is this: who are you entrusting yourself to? Who are you entrusting yourself to? Because all of us need to get our sense of self from somewhere. Like, I just want to tell you something. Today, you are getting your sense of identity from somewhere. You're getting your sense of well-being from somewhere. You're getting your sense of value from somewhere. And I love the definition for the verb entrust. You'll see it on the screen. Entrust means this: to make someone responsible for caring for something. So let's just give examples that you'll be able to answer out loud. When you hire a financial advisor, you are entrusting them with what? Your future money, your future finances, right? You're making them responsible to care for your money. Does that make sense? Parents, when you hire a babysitter, what are you entrusting them to be responsible for? Well, it could be your car, your house, but especially your kids, okay? And when it comes to your sense of self, you're entrusting someone with that. Who are you entrusting with it? Who are you allowing to take responsibility for how you see yourself, where your value comes from, whether you can be at peace, whether you're good enough, whether you're worthy enough? And I love this idea, like, let's entrust ourselves to our inner circle. Now, listen to what Jesus knew. In John 2, 23 through 25, he's at another Passover festival earlier in his ministry. And here's what John writes: Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not... Anybody else watching that? Jesus would not entrust himself to them. Why? He knew all people. He did not need their testimony, for he knew what was in each person. I love this. A lot of people throughout Jesus' life and his public ministry, some were cheering for him, some were condemning him. Some people who were cheering became the very ones condemning him. And I love what John tells us about Jesus. Jesus is like, hey, people are saying all kind of crazy things about you, but Jesus is not entrusting himself to them. He's not taking it to heart. Whose opinion are you taking to heart? Way more than you should. And Jesus, he doesn't entrust himself to this group of people, but he does know something that you need to know. He does have to entrust himself somewhere. And here's what Peter writes about the crucifixion moment in 1 Peter 2:23. Peter writes, when they hurled their insults at him, at Jesus, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he did what? Come on, 12 o'clock. You act like we're sleeping on me. He entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He did not entrust himself to the opinions of those killing him. Otherwise, Jesus would have defended himself. He's like, no, let me promise you, because here's what we try to do, right? Let me convince you that I'm not the person you think I am. He doesn't do that. He doesn't apologize for who he is. But he does not entrust himself to those people. He entrusts himself to, really, for him, the bullseye of his inner circle, which is his heavenly Father, who is the one who knows the whole truth about him. Now, let me tell you something that's really important that you might not expect a pastor to say in this moment. I do believe God needs to be the bullseye of your inner circle, but I believe you and I want to be fortunate enough to have a few other people in that inner circle, don't we? Did Jesus have an inner circle that wasn't just Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? Right. Yes, who was in that inner circle? How many of them were in the inner circle? 12, and then 3, Peter, James, and John. Jesus entrusted more of himself to those guys than everyone else. Do you agree? But there was a moment where Peter got kicked out of the inner circle. Do you remember that moment? Yeah. So just remember, there's the inner circle, Peter, James, and John. Jesus is like, hey guys, I'm going to go to the cross. I'm going to suffer. 3 days later, I'll rise from the dead. And Peter's like, no, you won't. And Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. If you ever want to know when you've been excluded from the inner circle, it's when somebody calls you. So he's out of the inner circle. And let me tell you why he's out of the inner circle. Because if Jesus kept listening to Peter, he would have avoided the cross. Right? Peter didn't know what was in his best interest. Peter didn't know what was in our best interest. One day he came back to the inner circle. Who are you allowing on the outer edges, on the outer circles, from culture, from the crowds, from people who don't even know you? Why are you allowing them to take up so much real estate in your heart and in your mind? At the end of the day, you know what won't happen at the end of the day? At the end of the day, when your judgment day comes, you will not stand before your boss. Anybody glad about that? Anybody got a current boss, as long as you're not on the Epic Church staff where you're like, I'm so thankful. When that day comes, we will not stand before the wealthiest people in San Francisco. You will not stand before your mom and dad. There will be one opinion that matters then, and my urging to you is let that be the opinion that matters now. And if you know how I try to move into growth areas in my life, this won't be a surprise to you, but let me give you something that's so helpful to me, and then I'll close, we'll be done. A lot of times when we're trying to get rid of a habit or a pattern in our lives, we just keep saying, I got to stop this, I got to stop this, I got to stop this. Does that work for anybody else? No. Guys, I don't talk myself into stopping it anymore. What I need is a greater ambition and a greater passion to run towards. So I'm not trying to stop myself from trying to please people. I'm just trying to move myself more and more into pleasing God. And guess what? If I get on the pleasing God train, guess which tracks I walk away from? Not by talking myself out of it. No, I've got a bigger ambition. At the end of the day, you're going to stand before God. And it won't matter what they thought about your McGregor cleats or how you ate your French fries or whether or not your idea was worth being funded or whether you were on the in crowd at the company or in your neighborhood or here at this church. At the end of the day, it won't matter what you thought of me or what I thought of you. At the end of the day, it will matter greatly what we did with the invitation to allow God to be the one who mattered most. There's one other scene from Pilate that you might remember. He asked Jesus a pretty wild question. Anybody remember when he said to Jesus, hey, do you not know that I have the power over you? Do you remember that? Yeah. Do you not know, Jesus, that I'm Pilate? I have the power to free you or to condemn you. And Jesus had this amazing response. Pilate, my friend. He didn't say it that way. But he did say this. You have no power except that which has been given you from above. In other words, Pilate, I'm not here to satisfy you. Pharisees, I'm not here to satisfy you. Ben Pilgreen one day, I'm not here to satisfy you. I am here to do what pleases my Father in heaven. So how do we please him? One way you may know, Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because whoever comes to him must believe that he exists, A, and B, that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So what are you chasing after? Who do you want to satisfy? And what happens if you get what you're after? Would you pray with me as our band comes up to lead us? I'm going to ask our prayer leaders just to stand down here towards the front as well as where the halfway there back in the aisle. Oh, I believe the Spirit of God can set you free today. And again, it won't be that we'll probably get rid of this temptation for good, but I believe there can be something that happens right now. Like you cannot please everyone, but you can please God. In Ephesians, Paul writes, find out what pleases the Lord. And yet we spend so much of our lives finding out what pleases everyone else. I want to see you set free. I want God to do something in you so that you're fine going public with your faith. You're fine bringing your true self to the office, to your kids' school, to the Epic Church community. You're finally ready to be the kind of person that who we see on a Sunday is who we would get if we came into your Tuesday 2 o'clock meeting. If we came into the privacy of your home, we would just see the same person. God, would you break things in us loose, especially this deep desire so many of us have to please humans, to please certain groups. Would you help us entrust ourselves to you? God, would you make every person in this room fortunate enough to have a few others in that inner circle whose voices won't matter as much as yours do, but really they are the few voices that matter. God, help us to spur one another on, to live into the fullness of the life we have in Christ. I believe it was Paul who said in Romans 1, like, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. God, we can please people or we can please you. We're not going to be able to do both, so help us to have courage. Your Spirit's alive in us. Your Spirit, it says that the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. Those who keep in step with the Spirit do not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. God, we want to go your way. We want to exercise faith. We want to live a life that pleases you. Free us. Free us from pursuing a life wanting to satisfy all the crowds out there. Help us to please you. In Jesus' name. Amen. I want to ask you to stand. Our team's ready to pray with you. This altar is open, and we want to just sing a song that's declaring what we said today, that I don't want people's opinions to be the big idea in my life. I want Jesus to be the big idea in my life. Let's respond with that in mind.